Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Well, welcome back to the show. I say welcome back because it's been a couple of weeks. We should be welcoming each other back to the show. I think the listeners just were privy to us just welcoming each other back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, just hey, how you doing? And let's get into it.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's been, I feel like the last show you all heard that we said the same thing. So it's summertime, right? I mean, we're going to take some time off. We've been pretty open about that. Different things come up here and there, but we have if you're going to have something that's going to bring you out of your semi-vacation, this would be the guest to do it. Paul Reddick, who is a phenomenal guest. Sure. I mean, I cannot wait for you guys to hear this conversation. Paul is somebody who is very instrumental in the Baseball Education Center. It's a website that you can get on. He's been around the game of baseball for a long time. You know, he's the author of a book called 31 Things Every Baseball Father Must Know If He Wants His Son to Succeed. He also wrote a book, Living with Jacob, wrote a book, The 567 Dad, which really is was one of the reasons that we reached out to Paul to see if he would come on, is to have share some of his insights into helping fathers and mothers and parents of athletes kind of navigate that. That's a tough one.
It is. It's interesting, because he walks me through the exercise, and it's interesting because what he said at the beginning is, hey, don't act like you know kind of what you know, and let's answer it. But at the end of it, it didn't matter. You know what I mean? Like,
you can't fake it.
It was, okay, I'm going to answer a few of these questions based upon what I think and where I think he wants to take this exercise. At the end of it, it didn't matter. That car was driving itself. And so I think it's really interesting for the listeners to hear how that works. But again, just a wealth of knowledge and another guy that you get done with it and you go, hey, I'm glad he's on our team, right? I'm glad that there are resources and people out there like Paul that athletes can turn to, that parents can turn to. It's just good to know we got good folks out there kind of fighting the fight.
It's so interesting you said that, Brandon, because as a bystander to that exchange between you and Paul, I knew, just knowing you as closely as I do, I knew your whys as to some of the answers to those questions and kind of what motivates you, what are your inner principles. And it was, so I almost had read the final chapters before, so as he's starting to kind of unpack those and ask you questions, I was like, okay, now we're getting into it. And then you started hitting on some of those things, and the listeners will really get a chance to be a fly on the wall for that discussion. The other thing that is really cool is you talk about a man in Paul who has a very clear why himself. Yes. On his website, there's a great one line that says, I am Paul Reddick and I use baseball as a tool to help dads and moms have stronger relationships with their sons. And it's such a powerful one sentence statement that just really, I think, best symbolizes what, he is doing, because he just shares just some of the tools and tactics that you can use as a parent in this discussion from his book, 567 Dad. But man, trust me when I tell you, you need to go get this book. And I'm sure, I mean, this is one I recently read, but I'm sure if you picked up Living with Jacob, that's about, really just problems that our students and teenagers face today. And then there's another book, that the 31 Things Every Baseball Father Must Know If He Wants His Son to Succeed. But there's so much information. We didn't even get into half of it. I can tell you that in today's call. But this is somebody who has been, as I mentioned in the interview, he's been lots of different experiences. Most notably, I think one of the most notable is, of course, director of the Yogi Berra Museum baseball camp. And it's not a bad gig to spend 15 years with Yogi Berra. Right?
I mean, just through osmosis, like the amount of baseball and knowledge and what I think Paul does a tremendous job of is just the way that he pulls it all together.
Yes.
Right? It's this, and he talks about it. He has been able to get so much information from so many really good people, right? He talks about the coaches that he was able to learn under and that mentored him. And then he's with Yogi for 15 years and, but he also has enough understanding and empathy to be able to turn around and go, hey, the way that I digest that information and then put it out there needs to be through the lens of that younger athlete, right? It's not my lens as a 49-year-old. It's, hey, what is that 10-year-old? What is that 12-year-old? What does that 18-year-old need to hear, right? And he talks about it too in the book about the Funnel 23 and so we go into that a little bit in this one. I think this is one of those that people will get done hearing it and be like, okay, so where's part two?
That's exactly right. Because he's going to challenge you. He's going to come at you as a parent, as a coach, and he's going to make you think about things. And he's going to make you, at the end of this episode, say, maybe I need to do some things differently. He's going to have you think differently. And he uses such great analogies. I'm not going to spoil it, but I love the one he uses with the iPhone and then the Polaroid camera, because, that one I think resonated with us. And he also has the best office decor of anybody that we've ever had on the show. I mean, it was like looking at a museum behind him as far as some of the photos and stuff. And I'm going to steal the idea. And Paul, if you are listening to this from you with the wall of fame where he retired the numbers on the wall of some of the people who have been most significant in the other person's life. Or in his life, which, and just so you know, number 11 will be.
Let's go.
That was Brandon's number. He'll have a spot in case anyone's keeping track at home. But awesome. I thought that was a really fantastic idea.
It's very cool. It's very cool. Paying homage to the people. Yeah.
Well, it's good to be back, man. I'm glad that we had a chance. And next week, it sounds like we're going to have another great guest. We'll talk about that, next week. But just
for the listeners, by the way, who can't see John, who shows up kind of looking lightweight and tan. He definitely was on vacation and apparently was able to squeeze in quite a few workouts. I hope you didn't starve yourself while you were gone.
No, discipline. Okay. I'm working on discipline. I'm working on
nice.
Right. I'm not. I'm. It's a work in progress always. But
always.
Well, speaking of work in progress, we've got Paul is going to talk to us, and I think after this conversation, you're going to feel like, hey, we all could get a little bit better, in how we're approaching the young athletes that we deal with, whether you're a coach or a parent. He's going to give you some good tools and tactics that you're going to be able to utilize right away. So get your pen and paper ready. Here is Paul Reddick. Well, as you heard from the introduction there, we have a great guest. Paul Reddick is on the show today. And Paul, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us. I know you've got a really busy schedule, but really appreciate you stopping in.
No, my pleasure. I'm really grateful that you guys would have me on.
Well, Paul, as I had mentioned to you, I guess in our early correspondence, one of the things that caught my attention is I had come across my Twitter feed, Brett McCabe, who's been actually a guest on our show a couple of different times, had retweeted, I guess it was a kind of a page, if you will, from your 567 Dad book. And I wanted to, we'll definitely get into that here a little bit later on, because there's so much that I think we can pull from that our listeners will really benefit from. And I'll be honest with you, Paul, and I'll share this story with you here shortly. But when I read this book, and I just got it got through it all. And it's a very easy read for the listeners. But when I read it, I was like, man, where was this book like in I guess it would have been 2000, probably 6 or 7, when my son was young enough where he really would have benefited from me reading a book like that. Yeah. So what was the inspiration behind, and I know you've done so many other things, but I mean, while I'm talking about the 567 Dad, what was the inspiration behind that book in particular?
I own a company called Baseball Education Center, and we do all kinds of how-to type baseball stuff. And so we have a pretty, lively, subscriber list. And so we get a lot of responses on a daily basis, thousands. And, we started to see a trend in the kind of questions we were getting. I would say if you went back, I don't know exactly, let's just say 10 years ago, I would get a lot of like, how do I grip a curveball? How does my kid throw harder, run faster, hit with more power? We started to get more questions like, what do I say to my kid on the way home? My kid, made an error in the tournament and he's heartbroken, doesn't want to play anymore. My kid doesn't want to go. Yeah, has a game coming up. He's so stressed out, worried he won't go to the game. My kid got dropped from a 10U roster, and so we started to see this kind of trend. And one of the good things about having a company like this is the questions show up in real time. So when we see it kind of as it's, on the upside of the curve. So I decided that I would start to take calls from baseball dads, just random anonymous calls. And so I opened up time in my schedule, which I still do today, 2 hours every single day. Actually, you guys got the slot today, so not today. But
great. There's some dad out there who's like,
I'll make time. And so the first call, August 6th, I'll never forget it. August 6th, 2016. And the guy said, I think baseball's cost me my relationship with my son. Mm. And I'm just like, and I had them back. I was doing them 15 minutes at a clip then. So I was doing them like 4 in an hour. Now I do them like a little spread out. But I mean, my heart just sank into my foot, and if they weren't backed up like one right after the other, I definitely would have called my assistant and said, if this is what it's going to be, I don't have this type of energy. Right. And, but what he told me in that conversation and subsequent conversations is that it wasn't the game of baseball that came between him. It was everything else in the game of baseball that came between him and his son. And essentially what he told me was he made 3 mistakes. Number one is he trusted the wrong coaches. And he watched as coaches pitched his son too much to win games. And they kind of abused his son. His son had come to him and he was about to go to college. And he came to him and said he doesn't want to go play baseball in college anymore. And that was the first time they had spoken in weeks. So it was a pretty significant event. And so he was battling with injuries. And so the kid didn't want to go to college. He didn't want to play in college. He wanted to go to school, not play in college. And then number 2, he said, we trusted the wrong organizations, because what we saw is that as his son got overused in tournaments, that, they would win more. The organization would more. They would market his son, and they would use his son as kind of a marketing tool. He just felt like his son was part of the business plan, not part of a team or development. And the third thing he said was he pushed his kid too hard, and he pushed his kid too hard because he just didn't know. Mm-hmm. The game has changed so much right? Since probably I'm 49. So in the time, I mean, even in the last 10 years, it's really changed, right? But it is night and day from when, we were growing up. And so he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know that it was any different from what he came up in. So when he looked at a baseball coach, he saw his representation of a baseball coach, some volunteer dad helping out, doing what he can. He didn't see that there was this machine that his son was in. And, so that was the starting point where I was like, wow. And I mean, I could go into a whole other side of it, but that opened up kind of my heart to, maybe I can be of some help here. That led to the book, the podcast, and a lot of other things we've done around helping dads. But the nature of the game, it's funny because we're old enough to remember the Bad News Bears. And the guy, remember the bad guy, Roy Turner?
Yeah.
He would be a welcomed, fresh breath of fresh air in today's world. He would be like, well, that guy's really got it together. Maybe a little disciplined, over disciplined, but so I always laugh at that.
That is awesome.
Well, and I'm so glad you kind of got into that a little bit. And I'll be honest with you, and the listeners are probably thinking this right now. I got so excited, Paul, to dig into 5, 6, 7 Dad. And I'm telling you, it is a must read for every, not just parent of a young baseball player, parent of a young athlete, parents in general, business leaders, because I have some thoughts around that later on as well. I mean, just the techniques and strategies that you put together here as far as how to have some of those crucial conversations is what I call them, is so important. But I was so excited to get into that I forgot to tell the listeners a little bit about you here as far as your what you're currently doing. So this is not the first book that you've written. You actually wrote a book most recently, was 31 Things Every Baseball Father Must Know If He Wants His Son to Succeed. And then you also, of course, have a book from 2017, Living with Jacob, and then have co-authored a couple of books, The Picture Perfect Pitcher, easy to say, with Tom House, and Unleash Your Pitching Velocity, among, get a load of this, serving as a scout with the Pirates, state delegate for USA Baseball, coached in the Expos farm system for a while, and director of the Yogi Berra Museum baseball camp. So I say that so that everybody understands that you're bringing a lot of different perspectives into this book. This is just one book, but when you're talking to dads out there about having these conversations and the right systems and to put into place, that's going to make it a more rewarding experience for not only the player, but the dad. It's not just some guy who's like, oh, I've got some advice. This is somebody who's done some things and has experienced it and seen maybe some of the challenges of when it goes bad, not just, the parent talking to you, but I'm sure in your role with the Yogi Berra, museum baseball camps, you probably saw it firsthand and just were, that's where some of those, strategies and techniques came from, right?
Well, I've had a really weird pedigree in baseball. My mom was a professor at Seton Hall University, and when she first worked there, she wasn't a professor when she started there, but she worked a little bit for the athletic department. And she got to know the people that were running the baseball program there, and I spent a good part of my childhood on that campus. And I was taking batting practice with Craig Biggio, Mo Vaughn, and walking on the field during game. It wasn't the way it is now. I thought every kid got to do that. And I spent my summers at their baseball camp and their winters at the baseball camp. And I had this just unique experience of kind of coming up in this environment. And then from there, I could happy to go into all of my failures as a player and a student. But from there, I came out of high school, and again, happy to go into it if you want. But it might be too long of a story. But I started coaching, and my first 2 coaching jobs, first 6 years, I coached with a guy named Jack Burns. And all these, I don't know if you can see these little numbers. I have all the retired numbers on my wall of all the significant people in my baseball career.
Yeah, but it's a great idea.
And then my second job was a guy named Ray Korn. And Jack, both are Hall of Fame coaches here in New Jersey, thousands of wins. I mean, if you wanted to pick the first 2 guys that you were going to be an assistant with,
right,
if you were going to choose it, and it just happened to kind of fall into that, And then during that time, I started in professional baseball, but I also, like you'd mentioned, I co-authored a book with Tom House. I was kind of, I don't know, I would say a glorified intern for Tom for a number of years. And we did a bunch of camps together. We did DVDs or VHS tapes, actually they were. And then I went to work for Yogi Berra. And so I had this very kind of unique experience of watching these Hall of Fame players when I was a little kid and how they worked in what was not great circumstances at Seton Hall University. I mean, now it is, but back then it was not at all. And then watching somebody like Yogi Berra, who literally almost everybody in the world knew who he was, president. I mean, it was surreal kind of being around him, but watching how someone who is of that significance and of that level of fame, watching him go about his daily life was a game changer for me. Because I came into that museum in the year 2000. I was 27 years old. I mean, I thought I was hot stuff. I had done some stuff, and watching him changed me. Really changed me, because so much of what he, the way he treated people, the way he never shied away from an autograph or a picture. If there was a veteran in the museum, he would make a point to come out and see them. He never turned anyone away for a conversation. He was just kind of, I always said Yogi was almost so much nothing that he was almost something. He was almost on the other end of the dial, right? He had gone so far. And the biggest thing is that, what he showed me about the game, and he showed me about how just the value of people and the value of father-son relationship and his family history. And I could go in for days about Yogi, but the biggest thing I could say is in 15 years of 2 to 3 days a week sitting in that office with him, he never once mentioned anything about Hall of Fame, World Series rings, nothing, never.
Wow.
And so that kind of, all of that, I don't know why. I just kind of got this blender of experience that I was fortunate to have. And so that molded a lot of the beliefs. And I would say at the center of that is the guy named Jack Burns, who gave me my first coaching job, who really showed me how to care for players and care for the people that, that are in your program or in your universe. And to this day, I still pull on all of that. So that is really the foundation. It's like all these men that I'm kind of, I don't know, doing my best cover version of what they taught me. So I don't know, very fortunate, almost like Mr. Magoo, I feel like sometimes, and, just walk off the thing and the next thing popped up. So yeah, I've been really, really kind of lucky.
So Paul, that having those types of mentors and being able to see it, and you and I are the same age. John's a little older than both of us, but that's okay. But we all kind of came up in that same era, and you mentioned earlier having that first conversation with that father that called, right? And
yeah,
I know John and I have talked about it on previous podcasts. There's been this crossroad. At some point, we had this shift, right? In the way that parents treat the young athlete. I think I don't remember from an exposure perspective my parents really caring that much about it the way that I see it today.
Right.
And even at the kid level too. So I still coach a 14U team here in Atlanta, and actually with a guy that you might know, but we can talk about that later. But it's really interesting to see how that has split, or the importance that the parent is now putting on the performance of the child, which is creating these wildly anxious young athletes who at this age shouldn't have any of this pressure. Where do you think we kind of got off the path? And now we are creating, you talk about the machine is creating this athlete that the pressure kind of pushes them away from the game if they can't take it.
Yeah. I mean, if you'll allow me to be honest and frank, there's an element in the game of baseball that is, I'd say probably the nicest word that I can say is self-serving, borderline even. I've seen it to the point where it's borderline evil, and in some cases criminal. I tend to hear a lot of things people don't post on social media. And so what's really been the problem, if I'm being frank, is like us, the middle-aged suburban, guy who didn't want to walk away from the game, found a way to become a bigger part of the game. Then there's a group of those who broke off and found a way to make money doing it. And then what they're really exploiting, and I think probably the evil thing for me is what they're really exploiting is this need for a parent to care for their child, to provide for their child, provide opportunity for them, to give them every advantage that they could possibly can. And then they're very good at playing people against each other in fear of missing out. And so what happens is there's almost like a couple things that have changed. There's almost like this countdown clock that has started, right? And so when we were coming up, I remember like when I was coaching when I started coaching with Jack Burns, we were coaching junior American Legion baseball. And the idea was, wow, if you got some kids to college, that was awesome.
Oh yeah.
If one kid in 10 years, 12 years went on to play maybe some minor league ball, that was like, but you were pushing these kids like, hey, don't waste it now, or don't blow it now. You want to have your, to make sure that we were saving kids' arms and stuff like that, because we didn't want them to perhaps miss out on a chance. But today that's not it. So this countdown clock has started that if you're not this by then, you're not going to be good enough. I'm going to pull out some props. I'm going to go in my closet, pull out a prop in a second. But then the second thing is the finish line has changed. So the finish line used to be, we want to help develop you, have a great high school career, maybe play in college. That would be awesome. Now the finish line is the 12U team that goes to Canada, Puerto Rico, and California and has 17 hats and 13 uniforms. And right, or you're going to be in some part of organization's elite team. So the problem with that is it's caused, let me make sure I want to go in the right direction. So it's caused what there's a you ever hear the book The Inner Game of Tennis?
No.
It was like it's a tennis book, but I mean, if it's a guy named Dr. Tim Galway, and he wrote it in 1974. So I was born in 1973, right? But I kind of remember the 70s, a little. I remember Jimmy Carter. I remember things on TV, right? And at the time, he coined this phrase that says performance equals potential minus interference. Performance equals potential minus interference. So if you think of those three words, right? Performance, that's how you did. Potential, that's what you're capable of. Interference, that's what gets in the way. So if you take what you're capable of and you take out what's in the way, you'll get to a performance that you really can get to. But I'm just going to draw this out. He had this cycle. It's not so well known, but real elementary. It's called the distortion cycle. And basically what it starts off with a distortion of reality, a distortion of belief, right? So if you go to Psychology 101, right, is that what we believe influences what we behave, and what we behave influences what we build, right? That triangle. And so what parents have right now is this real distortion of belief. And all of our systems of our body are responsive: psychological systems, emotional systems, physical systems. So when these people who are kind of running the game of baseball, when they put in front of this parent, this artificial timeline, this countdown clock, the parents respond to it and fear kicks in. There's nothing that motivates a person more than fear, especially when it comes to their child, right? There's no worse feeling than to think, I didn't provide something for my child, or I missed out. And so that's a distortion of belief, right? That's a distortion of reality. That leads to a distortion of action. So now you've got people who are doing crazy things, playing 150 games per year, pitching their kids 130 pitches, training 12 months a year, right? Doing all that stuff we hear, right? So that's a distortion of action. Then you get a distortion of results. And all of a sudden at 11, 12, 13 years old, all of a sudden, Johnny's not great anymore, or he doesn't want to play anymore. And then when you have a distortion of results, you have a distortion of self-esteem, because this cycle continues because the distortion of belief doesn't change. You still think that's true. The distortion of reality, you still think that's true. And so what this causes is this real problem in development. Hold on, I'm going to pull out here. And this is my all-time. I wish I had prepared a little bit. Hold on one second.
No,
It'll be worth it. Hold on. Of course, now here we go. Hold on. Wait for it. Okay. All right. I'm going to pull out a couple. But this is
I really hope it's a puppet.
No. This is better than a puppet. All right. You ready?
Oh, yes. The old Polaroid.
Jeez. Oh, no. Of course it doesn't work. But so this is what we have in baseball, right? We could take an instant picture with this.
Yeah.
Right. So now when I talked about the people that are involved in the game, they're also affecting coaches. So now you have people who are generating all of this importance, all of this perceived pressure, right? There's no real pressure. Games don't have human emotions. Events don't have human reactions built into them. So there's no pressure pack games. There's no big games or small games. There's no adjectives to an objective game. It's what we add to it. So that has spilled over to coaches because now all of a sudden you have a pay to play, a business. Now you got a kid who's paying $500, $2,000, $10,000, $15,000. The parents have traveled there, dropped $1,000 on hotel and all that other kind of stuff. And now the coach has to assemble a team that's going to have a return on an investment. And so now the coach is looking at his 10U team and saying, I want iPhones. I want pictures that are, done. I don't have time for this. Right. Oh, there we go.
Nice.
Well, almost half of it, but I don't have time for this. So the Polaroid that takes time is not developed. They're saying, you're a nice kid. I like you, but I got to win 6 tournaments this summer. I don't have time to watch you develop. Yeah. So now there's a real problem that happens that the kid who's the iPhone, he gets a lot of competitive experience, but he also gets burnt out and he doesn't get a lot of developmental experience. The kid who's the Polaroid, he can get all the developmental experience that his parents can give it him, but he has a competitive problem. He doesn't get enough competitive experience. So what happens is when he gets like 13, 14, we've got this mush of kids. And this is why a lot of times kids are leaving the game. This is why parents are confused. I often will say I do a lot of work with coaches, speak at coaches clinics. And I will say, coach, the parent who calls you up and curses you out on the phone or badmouths you on social media because you didn't bat his kid third or you didn't play him shortstop or you cut him from the team or you dropped him from roster. He's not mad at you. He's confused.
Right.
He's confused because the last 5 people that he gave money to told him his kid was elite.
Right. No question.
And now you're telling him he's not. So it's one of my things I say to parents, don't ever believe your kid is elite and don't ever believe your kid is not elite.
Yep.
Because you have a lot of guys who are Polaroids. Andy Pettit's, Mike Piazza's, Jorge Posadas, Don Mattingly's who are Polaroids that would have been told that they wouldn't be drafted today. Now today. And then you have a lot of kids who are iPhones who are just bigger, faster, stronger. They're just early developers. And a lot of times we confuse early development with talent. And just because your kid there's a 2-year standard deviation of growth. That's why we have 10-year-olds who look 12 and 10-year-olds who look 8. And so you may have a 10-year-old who's physically developed as a 12-year-old playing against a 10-year-old who's physically developed as 8. Right. Your kid goes out and dominates. You think he's talented. He's not talented. He's just bigger, faster, stronger. Yeah. He's just won a temporary genetic lottery. But when 16, 17 comes in, right, we don't see many 16-year-olds look 18 and 16-year-olds look 14, right? There's less. There are, but there's less, right? That's why it's a curve, right? And so I don't even remember whether I can kind of go off on that stuff. But
it's interesting you say that because I've got a 14-year-old son. We do the 14U stuff, and it is 100% the thing that I talk to him about. He's a football player too. He's 5'7". He's 130 pounds. And he's, we played in some tournaments this year where he sees a kid that's 6'3", his same age, throwing easy cheese at 84. And it's like, he's going, dude, like, what is this? And I keep telling him all the time, look, man, you work like you're small, work like you have to figure out how to make this thing and get shifty and figure things out. And I promise you, when you hit that spurt and you're 6'2", 6'3", and you're 215 to 240, it's going to make a huge difference. You'll blow by him. But trying to tell a kid in this generation where they need it now, right? To your point, even a parent that will allow for that Polaroid to develop, culture and social media overruns the patience, I think, a lot of times that's required.
That's a distortion of reality, right? Social media
right.
is the ultimate distortion of reality, right? They
For
show
sure.
the best, hide the rest. And so I understand it. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that this is why, I have lots of, beliefs around faith and stuff like that. And I believe like, hey, we're put in a time and we're chosen to be in a time to parent our children through this, one of the greatest shifts in communication, and it's causing a disruption of reality, a distortion of reality. So it's, this is where we are, right? So we have to deal with it the best we can, and guide our kids through that. And I also feel that there's a real, every generation has their divide. Our dad said stuff. We're like, yeah, get out of here, dad. But this generation this is really, 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 really a divide, right? I mean, take probably the Little League our fathers played, really similar, probably the Little League we played a Little League, town championship, all-star team. See you next, at the end of August, see you next March, right? And now that's obviously changed, right? But communication has changed, and we run a mentoring program that has about 50 kids in it. I could tell you a lot about that, but certainly the issues that affect these kids today. But what often we're in between these two worlds, where we're looking at baseball and we're looking at communication, we're looking at relationship with our kids, kind of the way that we used to look at it. And the thing is that we think because we know about this,
right?
Because we know about it, we didn't understand it. We don't really understand it. So I carry this around with me all the time. Remember these?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. So it's like every time I tell a dad, and my kid's not listening to me, I'm like, this is why, because you're taking this and you're like,
right. You're trying to figure it out.
Your lens, wrong lens.
You're using an antiquated communication system to communicate with a modern day player. And so kids today, they're more self-conscious than they ever were. And so they have more cameras pointed at them maybe in any game than maybe we had in a year.
For sure.
I have like 13 pictures of myself playing baseball.
Right.
It just was such a pain in the ass, right? To get a picture, to take a picture, develop them, right? Go to that thing in the middle of the mall, that little booth.
Yeah.
Right.
Box photo.
Yeah. And so, they're very self-conscious. The game travels with them home. And I'll give you an example. The one thing that I work with the most with parents and especially coaches about is what looks real to us versus what looks real to them. And so I had a kid who was in our mentoring program. He texts me on Sunday night and he says, hey, I want to talk about the weekend. I'm a little down, a little depressed, college player. I said, sure. Set up time, talk with him the next day, and gets on the phone and he's like, yeah, I'm not feeling great. I'm a little down, I'm upset, I'm a little depressed. I'm like, okay, well, how'd the weekend go? It's like, okay, I got a couple of hits. I did okay. I said, okay, well, and he goes, I wasn't in the hype film, from the weekend. And he kind of paused. And so I sat there thinking, okay, well, next he's going to tell me whatever the problem is.
Right.
That was the problem.
That was the problem. Yeah.
That was the problem. Now, in that moment, I'll never forget it for as long as I live, because I saw myself at the crossroads, the fork in the road. Like, by the way, if you're ever in Montclair, Highland Avenue, you could go to the fork in the road where Yogi Berra, I'll tell you the story. There is an actual place you can go to the fork in the road. And so I said, my instinct is to say, what are you, crazy? Who cares what's in a hype film, right? Come on. That's what the 49-year-old Paul wants to say.
Yep.
But to him, that was reality. I've lived half my life without this stuff, half of it with it. But to him, that was recognition, appreciation, significance, attention. He watched all of his teammates. He watched all the comments, and he wasn't included in it.
Yep.
So it was our version of the coach after the game going, great game, Ricky, good game, Jimmy, good game, Timmy, good game. And the coach didn't say our name, right?
Right.
But now this is like the whole community is, and whether it's a distortion of reality, whether we think it's real or not, it is real to them.
Sure.
And that is part of their real world. And so we have to, kids today, they want to know that somebody cares. They want to know that you'll listen to them. They want to be heard. And for a generation like us who came up to get respect, you give respect. Yeah, I agree with that. But, I can agree with it all I want, but it's not, it's It's just not the way to communicate with kids today. And actually, I'm like one of the people in my generation. I'm actually very optimistic. I'm actually very hopeful about kids in the future. I think we're going to be just fine. So, but there just is a way to speak to them, and I think that is that cultural divide is very real in the game. We're even applying even ideas around recruiting of like, how do I get attention or how do I get noticed and stuff like that. That's kind of that's like so 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like it's so different. And so, yeah.
No, you hit on something, Paul. And I mean, look, we could go on and on about that particular topic, because I think that what we're dealing with here in this relationship is, I always say, there's importance in helping people identify blind spots. And so blind spots for the father, and you said it so perfectly earlier, is they believe they are doing what's best for their kid. So when you go to that dad and you start to explain to them, hey, you're putting too much on this kid. You're putting too much pressure. He doesn't have to have the perfect swing. He doesn't have to have the perfect velo right now at this age. He's going to hit a growth spurt. When you say all these things to that parent, their thought to you is, I'm just trying to do what's best for my kid. That's why I'm going out and getting all this extra coaching and putting them in these situations where they can play on travel teams against best competition. Now, flip that, though, and you just made me think about this with that last comment about the kid over the weekend, is the blind spot for us, for those of us who can stand outside of the maze and point to people and tell them the right way to go from the observation deck, is the fact that we also have to remember to appreciate the pain points that, like you were just saying, that the kid has. Because, I mean, I was nodding my head for the listeners. I was nodding my head when Paul was talking about the fact that, I hear that hype film and it's like, why are you serious right now? Like, why would you care about that? Yeah. But we have to acknowledge that, because if we don't acknowledge that pain point, we're never going to help the rest of the process.
They don't hear a word. If you don't see the level of their issue, you can't pull them out of the distortion of it.
Right.
So you don't want to get into it with them, right? You don't want to jump in the poison pool with them.
That's right.
But you have to be able to at least help get there with them, let them be heard, and then kind of, pick it apart with them. And even still, it's still, a thing. It's very real for them. Yeah.
And you made me think of something that the listeners have heard me say on here, because I want to get into I want to unpack this whole conversation that we would have with a dad, for example, who is in that mode where they think they're doing the best by their kid right now. They're putting them in all these lessons. They're hoping that they get that perfect swing. And that's the 5, 6, 7 method. And it's really important. And the reason I think this is such a great thing is the listeners have heard me talk about, GPS, conversation GPS or solution GPS, is where, before your GPS can tell you where you're going and the right way to get there, it needs to know where you are. Right? It needs to know where you currently are so that it can help guide you through the rest of the process. And I think that's the key thing with dealing with that blind spot that the parent has, is starting to ask the right questions, the 5, 6, 7. So could you unpack, because I really, and you can probably tell by the way I'm just rambling about this, but I really think this is such a powerful tool.
Yeah. So which one of you wants to be the victim?
Brandon, he's still got a kid.
Yeah.
He still has a kid playing.
Hey, I roomed with John, so I was a victim many times to his various.
Just threw you. Just wasn't even a hesitation in it. Yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So Brandon, not being like a highly evolved dad, right?
Yep.
Give me like a hardcore baseball goal for your son. Like I'm talking about, you want him to be all state, get a scholarship, make a team.
Yeah.
What? Give me one of those.
He's going to be a Division I player.
Okay. Awesome. So Division I player.
Yeah.
Okay. Whoops. Sorry, I'm hit. Okay. So we are going to play a game And actually the 5, 6, 7 is, I could spend the rest of my life doing this. I'll never get bored of it. And it's the worst way to do it is in a book, like the absolute positive worst way to do it. So this is actually the best way to do it. Brandon, we're going to play a game.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you 6 questions, same question 6 times. All I want you to do is give me the first word or two that pops in your mind as fast as you can.
Okay.
The key to winning the game is speed. Now, are you the type of person that wants to just play games, or I feel like you're the person that wants to win games, correct?
I'm usually a winner. I'm not a winner, but that's what my goal is, yes.
What's the key to winning the game?
Speed.
So there's no right or wrong answers?
Yep.
There's just what comes up to mind. So to have your son as a Division I player, what's important to you about your son becoming a Division I player? In a word or two.
Ego.
What's important to you about being a man who has a healthy ego?
Success.
What's important to you about being a father who breeds success?
Easier life for the child.
What's important to you about being a father who provides an easier life for his son?
It makes me feel like I'm doing my job.
Fulfilled is it that? Fulfilled job. What's important to you about fulfilling your job as the leader of your family?
Responsibility.
Responsibility to who?
To the family.
What's important to you about being a man, husband, father, leader who takes care of responsibility to his family?
I believe that's what I was called to do.
By who?
By God.
By who? Okay. So here's the thing. So I'm going to break down what I did real simply. Now, what I have right here is his 5, 6, 7. Now, I don't know how long that took, probably whatever that was, 2 minutes if you have the time. What I have here is I've got the keys. I've got the keys to your soul, right? I've got the keys to your lock. We could not talk in 30 years from now. I could find you somewhere and they will be the same. Those are factory installed, right? And I'm going to show you something. I'll take it even to another level in a second. But what we start with, and basically when we do 1 through 4 is kind of like the surface level bowl. We just say it, right? 5, 6, and 7 are the deepest levels. 5 is your deep, 6 is your deeper, and 7 is your deepest need. So let's say I needed you to focus. I needed you to, dig in, work harder or whatever, get back in the game. If I were to say to you, don't you want your son to play D1? Come on. Right. That's enough to get it going, not enough to keep it going. Right. But if I say to you, Brandon, look, I need you to dig in here. I need you to fulfill your role here, your responsibility to your family. This is your calling.
Right.
Do you see how you're
that's wildly impactful. Yeah.
Right. I've got you, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm hitting on the what I'm really hitting on is your core values. I'm hitting on the things that are most important to you, which I would imagine the opposite when you see someone who doesn't fulfill their roles and doesn't have responsibility I'll bet you it pisses you off.
For sure.
When you don't behave in that way, right? That's when you're disappointed and stuff like that. So by having that, I've got healthy motivation. A lot of times when we do motivation, we like scare kids. This guy's working harder than you. Their team's going to beat you because they're putting in more time. That's enough to get it going, not enough to keep it going, right? I'll pull out another prompt. Hold on. Should have had these ready.
This is such good.
It's like Carrot Top.
Yeah. Without the hair and the roids, right? So
allegedly.
But so like we scare kids or we do rah-rah, right? We just throw pixie dust on it. Right? We set goals, we do brain chemicals. And so it's like a Red Bull, right? Remember your first Red Bull? Awesome.
Yeah,
right?
So does the cops.
Right? I feel like there's a whole nother podcast we could do. I grew up right outside of North New Jersey. I grew up Irish Catholic family. We could do I'm happy to come on for another segment.
We got you.
Oh yeah, you're in.
But every Red Bull that we use after that became less and less effective.
Sure.
Right. And that's what happens like with motivation. But so if I'm going to look for the newest motivational quote, the newest rah-rah speech, the latest book, latest meme, whatever, why? When I've got the combination. And what I did, I don't know if you heard me as I'm doing, as I was asking you questions, I took you from man, father, leader, husband, family. I didn't speak to the lowest level of you, which wants your son to play Division I. I spoke to the highest levels of you, which is you are a man who's a leader of your family. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the thing. You'll rip your beating heart out of your chest and give it to your family if that's the last thing that you need to do. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, Let me put this on steroids. Can I take it to another level with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who put this in you? You weren't born with this. Who put this in you? Who's the one person, if you said, I know how to fulfill my role, responsible for my family, because I'm called by God to do it. Who gave that?
I mean, I think, probably my father or mother, it's somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me what's their names?
Mike and Cindy.
So here's the thing. If I really wanted to change you, right? Part of what I think we get lost in coaching and this and that and all the things, right? Practices and all this. And like, here's what you're doing. You're not coaching kids. You're taking the very best parts that Mike and Cindy put in you. Mm-hmm. And they are stirring in you to where you're giving from overflow. A coach is a very weird profession, right? Mm-hmm. We have this thing in us. We want to transfer it to someone else. And then we want them to go out and do better with it than we did. It's very weird, right? And so what you're doing is when you step on the field, you're not stepping on the field to teach them anything. And you might, right? There's skills, there's stuff to do, but you're really taking what Mike and Cindy put in you and you're giving it to them. That's legacy. That's, what if they were sitting there watching you do it, right? You'd want them to see you demonstrating those values. Right. And so that's what we're really doing. So if we can I had a kid who, I think I was in the book, I don't know. But where the kid's grandma raised him, and his number 7 was to pay back grandma.
Yeah.
So if I want that kid to lay out for me, get dirty, play his heart out, right? If I say, don't you want to play D1?
Right.
Those kids are working hard. They're going to beat you. Or how about I say, hey, how about we play? Let's say, look, what if grandma was sitting right there? She put all this in you. Imagine her looking down at you, seeing what you're going to do today with what she put in you.
Yeah.
Now, what this also does is 1 through 4 is kind of the head, right? Mm-hmm. 5, 6, and 7 is kind of the heart, intrinsic, extrinsic. Now, when we talk about players that play well, we don't say, boy, that guy played his head out.
Right.
We say that guy played his heart out.
Yep.
We don't say that guy played out of his heart. No, we say that guy played out of his mind.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because it's to that other level. We try to re-engineer the zone and stuff like that. But I mean, if I wanted to get you guys in the zone, this is how I'd get you in the zone. This would lock you in and focus. Brandon, can I take it to another level with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you kind of stand up a little straight or sit up straight? Mike and Cindy, you still alive?
Yes.
What if you were at a game, you were coaching a game, you're over on the left field side warming up your team, Mike and Cindy came in the wrong exit, they're sitting over by the right field sign, and you saw the other team jawing with them.
Uh-huh.
And now you're standing there in front of your team, and you see that they're kind of giving your parents a little bit of a hard time. Now, even just your eyes, I want you to go back and look at this. What happens is this, look, when we get kids overly motivated, right? It's almost the same as bringing them down, right? Because we're just bringing brain chemicals up, brain chemicals down.
Up, right? Yeah.
Right. And so it spikes, right? Either way, it's a distortion, right? You don't want kids too high on kids. But look, I'd imagine I probably want to stay on your good side, right? So if I ever do anything to make you mad,
we're good.
We'll work it out. I'll apologize. We'll work it out, right? But what happened when you saw that your eyes? I will bet you that your mind became super sharp and clear, and your heart rate accelerated, but your mind didn't go with it.
Got it.
So now you have a kid who's getting those physical response, but he's not having the emotional disconnection from it.
Got it.
Right? And what if happened? Now I know it's a weird scenario, right?
Sure.
What happened if maybe the coach of the other team started walking over towards your dad, and he was like, man, I can't imagine what it would take to distract you from going over to protect your dad.
Right.
Like, even just look at like the way you're,
for sure,
right? Because I hit on a thing that's so precious to you. And so one of the things that we need to do in our families, in our teams, for ourselves is values. And so what I'm really doing is hitting on your values. Mm-hmm. A great way to come up with values is start with a really weird question. What do you hate? And I do this with kids. I ask them, what do you hate? And I ask them 5 times, right? And so I always give an example. Like, I hate people who are rude to people they can be rude to, like flight attendants,
right?
Wait staff,
right.
Coffee. What do they call them? Baristas, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because they know they can, right? Yep. And because those people can't clap back at them, right? So, man, there's nothing that pisses me off more. Someone's rude to a flight. Someone doesn't say thank you to a flight attendant when they put a drink in front of them. Yeah. I want to slam their head right into that thing. And I mean, that's it.
I'm with you.
But I can stay in that anger, or I can realize that when I see that, one of my highest values is violated. So now I could say, okay, I could stay pissed off at the idiot who was rude to the young waitress or something, right? Or the coffee house kid. Or I could say my value is to be extremely kind, cooperative, and patient with those people because they got a tough job. Mm-hmm. Now I'm living in I'm not living in a, can you believe these people? Right. And so when we have those values, those are the things to point ourselves back, our families back, and our teams back to. And that all stems from this part of when you have that for a kid, you will have a relationship with that kid. When you get a kid's 5, 6, 7, first of all, you'll be probably the only coach who dares to go that deep, who cares enough to go that deep. And you'll understand how to really drive them. And you might be the only coach who knows how to hit those buttons.
Yeah.
We make movies about this stuff, right? We make movies about people who tap into this part of them, right? That drives them. And so,
it's such a good thing. And thank you for going through that exercise, Paul, because I think the listeners will get a lot out of this because there's a lot of, it goes back to something I showed my business team not too long ago with Simon Sinek, Start With Why. And he talks in that little video clip. It's a book, actually, but he talks in that video clip about, when you ask most people about their occupation, they right away will go to what they do. And then the second thing they do is they'll tell you how they do it. And then the last thing they do is tell you why they do it. But he says if you really want to be effective is you want to flip that. You want to start with why you do what you do, then how you do it, and then finally you end up with the what they do. But it's that importance of why. And so when I was reading this book, I right away was like, okay, that's so key, is it's getting to the why. And as a father who raised 2 athletes, and Brandon is also in that same process, I think it hit me so hard because and Brandon knows about this, but so my son quit playing baseball right before high school. And it's all of the reasons why you put this in the book. I mean, here I am, a former, college baseball player, former college coach, and really just never could get out of my own way as it related to that relationship with him around baseball specifically, because I always say, as I looked at baseball with a lot more critical eye than it was. Yeah. But again, in my mind, it was all because I thought, man, I would have loved to have had a dad who was a college baseball coach and could have shared some of this stuff. But I always think about it's like the scene in Tommy Boy where Chris Farley is like petting the bird, the biscuit. He's like loves it so much he's like crushing it or whatever. It's like we do that as parents. But one of the things that I did on his senior day was I actually put a post on Facebook, and I'll send this to you separately away from this podcast. But I did a post on his senior day, and I had 2 pictures. One was me with my arm around him as a 12-year-old football player. One was me with my arm around him as a senior in high school football player. And I said, as I was coming upon senior night and being so reflective of everything, I wish so badly that the man on the right-hand side who was with the senior could have a talk to the man on the left-hand side who was with the 12-year-old, son, because of all the things you say. Is we want to do well. We want to make sure we're giving them the best opportunities. We get very fixated on it. But then I ended the whole thing talking about, instead of trying to make him a better you, try to make him the best him that he can be. Like, I think if that's the goal, and that really is the why, that's the whole, that's what I love about 23 funnel or funnel. Yeah. 23 funnel that you talk about in the book too, is like when we can really get to that. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing all these things that you think are good for your kid? But that, I don't know, that was very impactful for me. Would you share just kind of that mindset behind 23 funnel with the listeners?
Yep. So if you think about just, kind of like take a regular funnel, like, you would use in a kitchen, turn it on its side. The funnel's really wide at the beginning, right? So just take that from 0 to 23. Actually, I'm in the process of doing an upgrade to that book. That book, it's funny because it pops up every once in a while. I think it's like 5 years old now, and it's just, it's weird the places it pops up. But, at the age of 23, give or take a year, your son will take his first steps out into the real world. And whether that's in an office, in a school, in maybe a baseball field, maybe wherever, right? You want to have a healthy, happy, well-adjusted, confident young man ready to take on that next phase of life. So what needs to go into that funnel? What's the input that needs to create that output, right? So, man, we can make a long list of things that would go into that. But the key to it is that the funnel gets narrow as you get toward the end. More voices come in, more interference comes in towards the end of that funnel. So you have to do your best to put as much as you can into that. And so, are there mistakes? I'll often say, Dad, do you think dealing with a hard failure would be in that funnel? Of course. Well, when would you like to deal with that? Never when they're dealing with it, never when it's happening, right? Will he have to learn to be part of a team? Yes. Well, when would you like him to do that? One of the toughest jobs I have right now is I have a lot of fathers who hire me to mentor their 23, 24-year-old kids who get out of baseball and they can't keep jobs.
Yeah.
I had one kid, 6 jobs in 4 months, left one because he didn't like where his office was, left one because he wasn't on the project team that he wanted to, left one because he had to work in like a big room, like a pool type thing. Didn't like, and basically he just kept moving around because he thought the circumstances were going to change who he was. And, and he majored in canoeing, in college, and nobody cares that he hit 340 last year and can spit a sunflower seed from here to the wall. They only care about whether your work's done. And all of a sudden now, and this is, I think, one of the tragic parts of what we've created in youth baseball, in probably all sports, is I talk to a lot of 22, 23-year-old kids who think the best part of their life is over.
Right.
That is like, just, I mean, I am a Christian, like that is heartbreaking to me. Yeah. That's just not true. But if I'm looking at the reality of their situation, they're never going to be celebrated like that. They're never, they walk into the cafeteria at work. It's not like walking to the cafeteria in college. You don't have a sweatshirt that identifies you as a special person or something like that. And nobody's excited to see you. And so, they'll never have that level of attention. And the thing that they've spent so much time developing is almost useless to them now. Right. To them, it's not useless, right? That's part of the education of it. But, what I try and help, especially the dads and the coaches, look at is, in addition to 23, I like to look at 3 numbers: 23, 33, 43. So at 23, he's going to take first step out into the real world. And when I'm dealing with dads, we do a lot of work with recruiting, helping kids with recruiting. I say, look, when we're going to make a college decision for your son, I'm not making one on baseball, because that's an 18-year-old decision, 16-year-old, 17-year-old decision. And we don't know anything, right? Now, I'm going to make a decision for 23 when he takes first step out in the real world. And then 33, give or take a few years, he's going to bring you a grandchild. And we all have that moment. We look down, we see that kid. Oh my gosh, I'm this kid's father, right? And everything our parents said automatically becomes true. And I said, at 33, I want him to come to you and say, I get it now. I get it. At 43, he's going to be guiding, give or take a few years, be guiding your grandchild through the same process you're guiding him through. And to watch that. So into looking at that in a longer arc is very important to me. And so much of, I think there's some real innocent things that we do in sports. I can certainly, I don't know if we're good. We have time to go into that, but so I'll just say that the first thing I say to parents is, God makes major leaguers. And if your kid doesn't have that genetic ability, there's just a genetic level that we all have. There's a limitation to it. It doesn't mean we can't have a great career in high school, college, or even pro, but we all reach a genetic limit, right? And so if your son doesn't have that genetic arm speed, bat speed, foot speed, whatever to play, there's almost nothing you can do. I mean, there is nothing you can do to overcome genetic limitations.
Mm-hmm.
But if your son does have it, let's say he does have it, boy, there's millions of things you can do to screw it up. There's millions of things you can do to screw it up. And then we think the opposite. We think we can work hard, dedicate, discipline. I'll never forget, I brought Fred Hill from Rutgers in to speak to my kids when we had a big camp operation. And we had all our parents there for a recruiting seminar, 200, 300 people. And he goes, how many people think it's important to work hard in college? All their hands went up. How many do you think it's important that I look at how hard your kid works when I'm recruiting him? All the hands went up. And he said, no. He goes, Division I, everybody works hard. That's not special. And I mean, it was like a fart in church, man. I mean, it was silent. It was silent. And so to understand that, that there's a genetic limit there, that we can't overcome it. This is probably my most incendiary idea is don't cheer for your kid. Now, people say, like, well, what do you mean? So if he does good, I shouldn't get excited? That's exactly what I'm saying. If he does bad, I'm saying exactly. I'm saying you should be a neutral force. You should be one spot of unconditional love. So we all say we love our kids unconditional. But when we have an emotional reaction, especially a visible one, especially an extreme one, that appears to be a condition. Mm-hmm. And so now in a young brain, we get it. But in a young brain, when a kid hits a home run, you see it in Little League World Series, right? The guy's like going crazy. That's the only time dad has ever reacted that way to anything. Mm-hmm. And so when a kid gets that type of emotional reaction from their parent, in their young brains, they link that up that, that's attention, love, affection, significance. And so now I'll try and do it again. And when I don't do well, dad gets sad. And so it's very innocent, right? That we don't think of that, right? Mm-hmm. But in their young brains, when they do well on a sports field, which is, I mean, come on, right? Like it's largely, I mean, I watched this guy in Little League World Series going crazy. His kid hit a aluminum bat home run that, was still going up when it hit the, right. I mean, like this wasn't a real skill session here. You know what I mean? And so, but this guy's going crazy. And this also speaks back to the way we think about parent involvement is if a kid brings home an A on his math test, his dad doesn't have that reaction. Mm-hmm. Well, because dad might not coach. Dad doesn't get partial credit for the A in math, but he gets a win if he's coaching the Little League world. You know what I mean? Like there's also like a little bit of social pressure. So in their young minds, they link that up. And I often will say, if we thought our kids were going to take a hit of some drug, right? Let's say, I don't know, they found some drug somewhere, like, and they were about to like take a puff of something. We would slap that out of their hand, right? We'd push them out. We'd do anything, right, to prevent them from getting that linkage in their brain. Right. But the chemical reaction is the same. The chemical reaction is exactly the same as it is. They are looking for significance, contribute. They're looking for, and so when we give it to them in those extreme ways, that's how they link it up. And so another tough part of kind of like this work we do is that a lot of times a father and a son, their only bond is through this time that they're playing sports. And when that structure goes away, now all of a sudden there's that linkage, that bridge is gone. And then there's no outlet. There's no other way for that son to get that emotional reaction from the parent.
Yes.
And so, and then the only thing, the last thing I would say, and then I'm happy to stay and whatever you guys talk about is always set expectations with your kids. I have two sons, the lights of my life, and they don't play baseball. They didn't choose baseball. Yeah. They weren't interested in it. And aside from a very small part if you came through my home, you wouldn't know that what I do or anything like that. They chose different sports, different activities. They have, and even different from each other, right? So I wanted them to have that freedom. But my only thing is two things. Whatever they commit to, right? We're gonna stay with that, right? They're not gonna quit, and they give everything they got. So if I'm dropping them off at karate at 6:00 and they've been at school and track and all that kind of stuff, okay, look, give what give everything you got. If you got 80, give 80, right? But if you got 100, you better give 100. Right. And then be respectful to everyone involved: umpires, referees, coaches, senseis, whoever, right, involved. And those are the only two things I talk about. I'm not going to say it's easy. My kid breaks a board in karate and everybody's going nuts. And I'm sitting there like a statue. And when they get in the car, I say to them, they were like, Dad, I broke a board. I said, are you proud of that? Yes. Who did the work for that? I did. Good. I'm so happy for you. That's such a major distinction. Like, I'm so happy for you, Thomas, or I'm so happy for you, William, that you had this. And I think it's great that you put in that work to do that. And that's it. They don't, and I always make sure to let them know, like, this stuff is not important to me. But you did the things that are important to me, and so anything you do after that, just kind of belongs to you. And like I said, I'm not standing here as some altruistic guy I've just listened to 6,000 conversations from dads who kind of got it wrong.
Right. Yeah. And,
and so that's kind of, those are some of the like base ideas I think are just so important.
Listeners, I hope so bad that you've got the pen and paper out, as I always ask you to do with Paul, because there are so many key things here. One of the things you just said there, Paul, is part of a conversation I had with my son when he came and said, I don't want to play baseball in high school, was, that's fine. He goes, well, I didn't expect that reaction. I said, son, baseball was my favorite sport. My dad's favorite sport was basketball. It doesn't have to be your favorite sport. Like, it's so critical for us to be able to give permission to those kids. One last thing, Paul, because I definitely want you to talk about this, and then we'll be bringing you back, I'm sure, hopefully, as long as you're willing for another conversation. But one of the things caught my attention recently, speaking of thoughts that maybe are a little bit different than what some people might expect, is yours around mental performance, because that's what our whole, podcast started out being about. And we talk about some of those things, the imagery, the, folk being present, all of dealing with adversity, all of those things. But I know that you have a little bit of a different spin on some of that. Could you just kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay. So let's play a game. You guys know what a lightsaber is?
Yes.
Okay. You can picture one in your head?
Yes. Well, John has it in his garage. Yeah. John is actually the guy. Have you seen that viral video? That was John 12 years ago.
You can hear the sound it makes when it lights up,
there
right?
You
You've got a color of one. Okay. I'm going to come back to that in a second. So one of the criticisms that I have around kind of mental skills coaches is, often I think a lot of them come from almost like a fan base of self-help. That this has been useful to them. They've learned a few things. They're almost junkies of it in a way. And so they know a lot about it. And so they teach it. And oftentimes it's what they've used to kind of cool the waters in their own experience. So my problem with it is, if you have a kid who, let's say, has fear, worry, anxiety, regret, depression, there's only one thing that could cause that to happen. They're using the power of thought to make a movie about the future. That's scary. They're in it and it's scary. Or they're going back to remember something in the past that we very rarely do with accuracy. And they're kind of, having a bad feeling about that. So I could probably take you guys back. Think of one game you guys played last year. Bad loss, bad call, unfair, pissed you off, right? Now, when we're looking at thought, like a capital T thought, we're the only way that we could go back to that event in the past is through the power of thought, right? You weren't thinking about it 5 minutes ago. You weren't thinking about it today, but I was able to drive you back. Right now, if I could think of we could think of something maybe is coming up in the future that you're anxious about or worried about a future about, and now you're using the power of thought to make a movie about the future. But the whole distinction I make with players is you're the theater, you're not the movie,
right?
And so the theater never becomes the movie, and theater, it comes and goes. Thought by nature is transient. Thought by nature is generally almost irrelevant. How many thoughts have you had today that like you just go like, what the hell is that about? Right? Like, I mean, and or thoughts that are just like you think them and you're like, oh God, like what's wrong with me? Right? Everybody has those every day. And so, but and if thought wasn't transient, we'd never get over anything. But somebody who's having fear, worry, anxiety, depression, they're looping a movie about the past, or they're looping a movie about the future. The reason I can prove to you that thought is irrelevant, transient, and is, where's the lightsaber?
In the garage.
Well, the lightsaber's gone. Where was it since? Right? Where did it go?
Right.
It's gone.
It's not in the space anymore. Yeah.
It's gone. So this, but here's the other thing too, is that you have that, you can pull back that picture, right, of the lightsaber.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can hear it. There's no such thing as a lightsaber. It doesn't exist.
Right.
But it's a movie that we've seen so often that we know all the details, right? In an instant. You didn't have to think about it, right? In an instant. And then you forgot about it. And then it came back. So I want to make sure that when I'm dealing with my players, that the person who really taught this to me had a great quote where he was teaching it to another person, and they said, "So you're telling me what I'm seeing is a mirage?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but it's a real mirage."
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Right.
It's a
little bit
mirage.
of an oxymoron. Yeah.
Right. I work for Yogi Berra. Words are important.
yeah. But anybody, yeah.
So it's almost like if we've ever seen like a stick on the ground and we thought it was a snake, and we, right. Oh, right. But in that moment, it was real enough to get us to stop. Mm-hmm. So what I don't want to do with players is I don't want to get into the mirage with them. I want to help them see that they're drifting. Now, just that to say you're using thought to go forward or back. Now, if we come back here, just kind of understanding where we are. We had this chart that we give our players that they look at, that if we just give them time to settle. I always have this like snow globe, right? A kid is thinking about the past, thinking about the future, right? He has a distortion. But if I put this down, the nature of the snow globe, it will settle. Mm-hmm. But what we do is like, you're depressed. Oh my gosh, you need to do this. You need to do something else. Oh, you're worried. You need to do this. You need to do this. And we're shaking it up with them because we're getting in. And the more people that get into the distortion with them, the more the distortion looks real. Mm-hmm. And so that's my issue with it. And oftentimes I think we have mental game coaches who just scare the crap out of kids and then teach them how to be fake tough to overcome the scary, the lightsaber, the dragon. Like they paint an evil dragon. And then I think there's people that get in there with them and teach them a lot of that, get in the metaphorical boiling water with them and teach them how to throw some ice cubes in it.
Yeah.
And I can certainly go one by one down what I think techniques, are helpful or unhelpful. But I'll say in visualization, baseball is not a great game for visualization because their variables change. So I often ask pitchers and hitters when they tell me, "Oh, we visualize," and so, "Well, what do you visualize?" I said, "Well, I'll visualize myself taking a perfect swing, hitting." I was like, "Who's the pitcher you visualized again?"
Right.
Was he right-handed, left-handed? How hard did he throw? Tall, short, fast tempo, slow tempo? What pitches did he have? How did he set up? What has he done to you the last 3 at bats? Mm-hmm. If I talk to pitchers, who was the hitter you faced? What's the team? What's the situation? And so, visualization became popular. I remember that the Olympic, the diving team, right, was the first one that, like the 80s, that really made visualization a thing. And every team did that. And the team that won bronze, they visualized too.
Right.
And the teams that didn't medal, they visualized too. But if you're doing something like diving, yes, where all the variables remain the same, and you practice on probably the exact dimensions and height and depth of pool and diving platform, then if you are acting, then yes, that can be helpful to rehearse it. But if you are reacting and being responsive, like baseball is, it's really hard. It might give you a good feeling for a little bit, but what I would rather have kids visualize on is process. So visualize yourself working, visualize yourself putting in work, visualize yourself overcoming things, visualize yourself, what we call doing every little thing, like visualize yourself in things that you can actually do. So if you want to visualize yourself sprinting down the line every time you hit a little weak ground ball or something, that's a positive thing to visualize. If you want to see yourself, being a great teammate or getting there early or hitting the weight room or things that you can control, that's great. But when we put that around performance, it really creates like this, because really what you're visualizing is a highlight reel of yourself playing at your best. When we all know that when everybody's going well, we all play well when we're making shots.
Right.
Right. So, start to think about like, hey, if you want to visualize yourself fighting off a pitch of 2 strikes, great. That's great. That's great. Stuff like that. Like, and so, I could go on for a long time about that, but I just think we've kind of created this, we back to our beginning of our conversation, in this distortion of reality. Mm-hmm. We've creating all of this imaginary importance around things, and that's creating all of these emotions. That's boiling the water. And now, and I'm not criticizing anyone specifically, but like in the mental skills, it's like, okay, well, here's some things to put some ice cubes into boiling the water, but like, let's look at the heat. Let's look at maybe why are we having these issues? And I'll say just the last thing. I think mental health wise, what becomes very difficult for a player is when they have these emotions, especially if they've had success. If they start to have emotions that are detrimental to them, it's almost impossible for them to come forward with them, because it's such a break from the character they've created. And that is one of the things I'm most concerned about, is that kids who have success feel the need to continually kind of create this character. They will even talk about like creating an alter ego as like, a way to approach games. I'm sorry. I cannot get into a discussion about a kid creating an alter ego to pretend, because eventually that will subside. And then lastly, I'll just, to the parents, I would say, I want the parents to be very, very aware of there's a thing in the mental skills world about, neuroplasticity, right? You can change your brain through thoughts and stuff like that. Most of those studies were done long before the advent of the internet, social media, and cell phone video games. Now, everybody knows you can't out-train a bad diet. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to out-mental skill a bad mental diet. And the mental diet, the amount that is coming in, it's just, there's not enough. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're taking in 6,000, 7,000 calories a day, and then we're going for a walk and wondering why we're not in good shape. And to the parents, I would say, please do not underestimate that somewhere right now, there's boardrooms of people in the video game industry, pornography industry, apps, social media, that are actively, purposely trying to get your kids hooked.
Yeah.
And that to me is that's disturbing, but they are trying to get your kids into a situation where they can't give up these things. And that's a real force that we're up against.
No, I'm happy to hear you say that, Paul, because when I was working with a lot of teams and players, one of the things I used to always, how I used visualization and imagery was usually to that point was, how are you going to get yourself out of these situations, these bad thoughts, whenever adversity hits? What are what's the way you're going to release that? What's the way you're going to refocus? Like those types of things. Because I do think you bring up a good point, is too often we think of this utopian type of a landscape of like everything working, and baseball just is not that game that you can do that with. So, and by the way, you made me remember is your podcast At the Seams, a mental health podcast for athletes, is another good way that people can listen to some of your content. So for the listeners on Twitter at Paul Reddick 567, you can also go to, and gosh, you talk about just a platform for resources. Go to paulreddickbaseballvip.com, and there was a lot of really cool stuff I saw on there. And then it looks like you also have a Baseball Dads Facebook group that you've got kind of going on with that. The Baseball Dads show is also a podcast. Anything we're missing that people could tune in? Because
yeah, I mean, the Baseball Education Center is actually, that was Paul Reddick Baseball. So Baseball Education Center is the main site. I'm not super active on Twitter. I'm just not that way. But but if you go to Twitter, it's Paul Reddick 567, and then there's a link there that contact and everything. You can kind of spread out from there.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Paul. And one of the things that I hope that the listeners and the parents that are out there have heard, and coaches, is a lot of the tools that you talk about have to do with questions. It just starts with kind of just continuing to ask the right questions over and over and over sometimes until you really get to the root of what's going on. And I think it's so key. And I can't thank you enough for not only joining us on the show today, but just as a parent, thank you for everything you're doing and continue to do to help the game of baseball and just parents in general. I really think that, you're doing the Lord's work there, and I really thank you for doing it.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. This has been great. I'll come on with you guys anytime, and anything I can do to help, please just let me know. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. We appreciate it.
All right, guys.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.